Hello and welcome to Nook News. I'm Beth Hadfield, the Activity Coordinator at the Center for Active Living. Today on my show, I bring you Jerry Levine and Marcia Richards. They are going to be the host of a new show called Nutritious and Delicious. I might have had the words backwards, but that's okay, we'll get to that. Jerry is a research chef that developed food products for processors, restaurants, restaurant chains, supermarkets, and feeding establishments. Marcia Richards is a registered dietitian for Healthy Plymouth. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me today. Jerry, do you want to tell us a little about the show?
Well, the show was
creation.
basically set up with two objectives. First, we wanted something that looked good, smelled good, and tasted good. And secondly, and Marcia will talk about this, is that we wanted it to be nutritious. And that was the goal. What we're doing here is designing food for those of us that are a little bit older and that want to live a healthy life with the objectives of the quality of life is much more important than how old you happen to be. And that is what was our objective was. So I'm interested in something that looks good, tastes good, smells good. Marcia would like to talk about nutrition.
So with nutrition, naturally the look good and the taste good definitely goes with it. But when Jerry and I first met, one of the things that we talked about was that there's so much information, there's so many nutrition recommendations for all age groups, but in particular for our population over 60, that what we wanted to create was a way for people to be able to have a practical application about all of these recommendations. So not just saying, have food that has less sodium, have food with less sugar, decrease the refined grains, replace them with whole grains. What we want to do with this show is actually facilitate the application of all of those strategies. And another aspect which Jerry has incorporated is the strategies for a person who might be experiencing arthritis or some other physical challenge. What are some of the techniques or food prep strategies that you can incorporate to make the whole preparation that much easier? But bottom line is food should always taste good, and that's remained our highest priority.
I think it's great. Being at the Center for Active Living, food comes up a lot. You know, we serve lunch every day, we serve breakfast some days, and what you're being served has to look appealing and taste appealing. So starting there, does color matter when you're putting your plate together?
Well, let me try to explain that. And without a doubt, it is very important to have it attractive, because we see when we look at a plate, we have to be turned on to it in a very simple manner. First thing we do is we see it, even before we smell it or we taste it. So the answer, what we try to do is we try to add varieties of color, have them plated so the plating looks like it belongs together. Okay. And the colors work with each other. And we don't want things like dull browns. And we want things that kind of jump out at you and make you want to go to the next step, which is to smell, and then ultimately to eat.
Yep.
Color is important.
And the color is also important from a nutrient standpoint, that the deeper, richer colors tend to signify deeper, richer amounts of nutrients. So when we're thinking about color, we should be eating from the rainbow, so to speak, that we should try to have as many vibrant colored foods as we possibly can.
So at every meal, like should your plate kind of look like the rainbow too when you're, because how many vegetables should you eat at that meal, or are we incorporating fruit and vegetables into the meal, I guess?
I think there's no reason why we can't at all.
Yeah, and also in certain cultures, I've spent time in the southern part of the Mediterranean, and breakfast there's a lot of vegetables. There are fruits there. So you're eating from the rainbow. And then you go off into lunch and healthy salads. And then at night, then you do some kind of a combination of dish that has some carbohydrates into it, maybe a little pasta, maybe a little rice. And then add some of the dark vegetables, the darker the better, and then a small quantity of fish, chicken, meat, something like that.
And the portion sizes that we're talking about are not that large. We're talking a half a cup of fruit at each meal, half a cup to 1 cup of vegetable cooked. So, that's the size of like a half a tennis ball, if you needed to visualize it. So I think sometimes when people hear, you're supposed to have 5 servings of vegetable a day, it seems like an enormous amount, when in fact we're only talking about 2 cups. And those are the things we should be trying to fill up on and having less of the foods that don't provide us with a lot of nutrients. And they taste absolutely delicious. Berries, bananas, oranges, watermelon, cantaloupe, pineapple.
In addition to that, I guess maybe we could talk a little bit about seasoning. My next question is, what makes a delicious meal? It's not obviously just the protein and the vegetable. It's, I would think, a combination of seasoning also.
Without a doubt, you're absolutely correct. In our society right now, we tend to use a lot of salt. And that's a traditional way of doing it. We also tend to use a lot of sugar. So what do we do in that case? We're trying to eliminate, or at least cut back on the salt level. We're trying to cut back on the sugar level. And there's obvious reasons for that. And Marcia can talk about that. But the point really is, so what do? We use aromatic spices. We put some basil in there. We put some oregano. We'll put some cilantro. We'll chop up a little bit of onion or a shallot or something that brings up flavor. That allows you to lower the salt level and the sugar level, and then ultimately the brain gets used to having the sugar and the salt level lowered and says, well, that's normal. Even though 2 months ago you were eating a much higher salt level, and that was normal because the brain was used to eating that. So there is a way of dealing with that, and then also some of these seasonings have some nutritional value.
Definitely, definitely. All of herbs have been used since the beginning of time. Salt actually comes from the word salary, and at one time salt was traded as a version of salary. But salt originally, and Jerry can correct me, he's much better at this kind of stuff, but originally salt probably came into being used as a preservative because there were no refrigerators in early villages. But a whole ton of it wasn't being added to the food all the time. So when we start using all of the other herbs and seasonings, we're adding nutritional value. These are plant-based, growing from the ground. They typically have amounts of vitamin C, maybe vitamin A, maybe some B vitamins. They have elements called phytochemicals or flavonoids that are also being shown to confer better health without the extra sodium in our body that holds onto fluid. That can have an impact on a person's blood pressure. And the taste buds do get used to sodium or salt, but they can get unused to it. And foods taste so much better when we use this array of seasonings. So when we were designing our show, we always like to use that word healthy, but sometimes that word makes people not want to listen to us. And what we really want to make people realize is that this food is absolutely delicious, simple to prepare. You do not need to be a Julia Child. You don't need to be a Jerry Levine either. And also budget-wise too, that everything we're doing, we pay close attention to what would it cost for the average person to prepare this meal. So we're very cognizant of those things.
Question, spices, is it okay to use the dried spices that we buy, or is it really better to use the fresh, but is one okay versus the other? Are you still getting the same flavor out of what you're using?
I'll let Jerry comment on the flavor. I think it's fine to use the dried if that's what you've got available.
Okay.
Where we live, sometimes you can't get fresh of everything.
Right.
I think it's absolutely fine from a nutritional standpoint to use the dried.
Okay.
Marcia's point should be well taken. The spices, the dry versus the fresh is going to be somewhat different.
Okay.
They're seasonal. Some are not available during the winter time, though the way we ship things nowadays, that's probably less of an issue. But they are different, and there are times when I'm making a tomato sauce, I would prefer to actually use some of the dry spices because I like the flavor.
Okay.
But one thing that's really important is if you're using dry versus fresh, you want to make sure that you adjust the amounts. You can't just say, well, it says 1 teaspoon of dry, so you can't just put in 1 teaspoon of fresh. You're going to have to put in more.
Okay.
And you'll have to make those adjustments.
Okay. All right. We were talking about the fresh fruits and vegetables that we can get at the store now. And we all know that all the supermarkets run different sale items on different weeks. Is it okay to buy the acorn squash that's on sale this week and maybe cut it up and freeze it so that you can use it on a different day? And does it change the nutritional value by doing that? And what's the easiest way? I'm asking too many questions, but what's the easiest way to get it ready to put it in the freezer so that you can take it out and utilize it down the road?
Okay, I'll talk about the physical characteristics of the acorn squash.
Okay.
Marcia can talk about how the nutrition is affected or not affected by freezing. Okay, first thing that you want to do, acorn squash freezes dynamite really well, extremely well. So you peel it, you clean it out, dry it, chop it up so it's in the shape that you want to use once you defrost it, and then put it in a Ziploc bag and try to get as much air out of there as possible, and freeze it.
Awesome.
Okay, so now you take it out of there and you want to use it. What do? Well, the best way is to defrost it within the refrigerator, but there are defrost cycles on microwaves, and they do work. You just have to watch them.
Okay.
As far as the nutrient content, it's going to matter on the squash.
Okay.
So if you buy frozen vegetables or canned vegetables in the supermarket, typically the industry has determined when that fruit or vegetable is at its peak of ripeness or freshness. So quite often a canned or a frozen product can be more nutritious than a fresh one, because when you buy the fresh one, you don't always know, is it at its peak of freshness? So fresh is awesome, but I don't think anybody should ever be worried about becoming deficient in a nutrient if they choose frozen or canned. With that said, though, purchase things without added sugars, without added sauce, without added sodium or salt, and do your own seasoning. Have more control over that. So if I get a canned vegetable, I always get them canned without sodium. And I use the amount of salt that I feel I need versus the amount. You can go from 750 milligrams in a half a cup of green beans to 0. And if I sprinkle a little salt, I'm not going to have 720 milligrams. And the same with frozen. So that's, you know, a bit of advice that I would encourage most people to do.
So we really want those people buying canned vegetables to really read the label and make sure it says no sodium added or no salt added. So
or look at the label content too. If you don't see it, sometimes the food might not be labeled as low sodium, but when you look at the sodium content, it could be very low. 140 milligrams is considered low sodium. So if you look at a label and per serving, if it's less than 140, that is the legal term for low sodium.
Is there an amount of sodium we should ingest in a day or eat in a day versus, you know?
So the guidelines up to the age of 60 are 2,300 milligrams per day. Over 60 drops down to about 1,500 milligrams. So if you divide it between 3 meals, about 500 milligrams per meal, it's very doable. Very doable. If you eat a lot of processed foods, if you eat out at establishments that serve a lot of pre-made or processed foods, it's easy to go over. But if you're doing your own food prep and you're kind of pay attention where you're eating out, if it's home cooked or fresher food, it can be done.
Is salt naturally in a lot of things?
Milk, dairy products, and a little bit in meats. Other than that, it's usually added. Usually added. Okay. Yep. Like my wheels are turning there. It's going to be hard to get a grain product without sodium because you have to add it to activate the yeast.
It's part of the
the whole
it is.
process. So it's not there naturally, but you won't have a loaf of bread, I don't think.
But the levels are very
We
low.
hope they don't.
high.
The
It might be
levels to
flat.
activate yeast, the sugar and the salt that would be used
It's not much.
is very low.
Yeah, it's not much.
And that's not really the point. The point is that if all you're doing is activating the yeast and you don't want to add the salt or the sweetness to it, and you activate the yeast, you won't taste the salt and the sweetness.
Mm-hmm.
You have to add more of that in. But if that's what the recipe is doing, you know.
It's okay.
Yeah.
So is there a difference between the iodized salts, I want to say of yesterday, and like the Himalayan salt or the sea salt that we see a lot of today?
There's no iodine in those. Well, sea salt, would that have iodine in it?
It would be.
These are very hard questions.
I'm sorry.
It would be. It would be in there, but it's at a very small level.
Okay.
The point is that why did they add iodine to salt?
I guess that's
Okay, and if
To
you'd like to
prevent goiter.
discuss that.
So goiter is a condition of iodine deficiency results in goiter, which is this enlargement on your neck. So that was seen, I don't know what year, if it was like in the 40s or the 30s. I can't really
Okay.
remember
I don't
that.
recall.
But
So they found a way to
they started
counteract
to
it.
add iodine to salt. So a lot of foods have iodine in them naturally, foods that are grown along the seacoast. That's why I
Okay.
was asking Jerry about the sea salt.
Okay.
Himalayan salt, I honestly don't know. Will we become iodine deficient if we don't use iodized salt? Probably not if we're eating a wide variety of foods.
okay.
Probably not.
But a lot of the salt is mined from areas where there was originally an ocean on top of them.
Oh,
it
that's
may
true.
be in a mountain range now,
Okay.
but there was oceans all
over the world.
and it all had to do with the glaciers.
Right.
You know,
Yep.
the sea going up and the sea going down. Right now we got a sea going up because of global warming.
Yep. Yep.
So Delicious and Nutritious is a show that's designed for people over 60. And one of my questions is, a lot of our people over 60 are either single now, or they're only cooking for two. So I have two questions. One is it okay to cook a large meal, a lasagna, broccoli, chicken and ziti, and divide it up and freeze it? And are there benefits to it down the road? You know, in
Okay.
preparation.
The answer is some things freeze really well. Other things don't freeze really well. And simply put, the reason why they don't freeze well is because the cell walls in whatever you make, like a tomato is a good example.
Okay.
If you freeze a tomato, the cell walls get broken, and instead of having this nice red thing, it just all falls apart to mush. Okay, if you can accept that, that's fine. But if you have something that freezes well, and you cook enough to have leftovers that you want to freeze, the key issue is making sure that you watch the temperatures of these things so you don't have something sitting on the counter for 3 or 4 hours before you decide to freeze it. So if you want to freeze something,
Okay.
have your dinner, go to this food, and then package it up, put it in the refrigerator if you don't want to freeze it immediately, and then get it into the freezer as fast as possible. It's more of a sanitation issue.
Okay.
You don't want things sitting around and the temperature going up and up. because you got little bugs that want to cause problems.
Yeah, from a food safety standpoint.
You know, that's funny because in years ago, I would say, we were always told, well, let it cool before you put it in the fridge.
Right.
I mean, so, but now you're saying, well, that's probably not the best
No, now they're
choice.
saying chill it immediately, right? Or as soon as possible.
Well, the experience in restaurants, and they are adamant of time temperature issues,
Right.
is things don't get allowed to sit around.
Okay.
It needs to go into a refrigerator or a freezer or on somebody's plate and serve it to them, and it doesn't sit out. Or if you need to put it on a steam table or a line which will hold them at a specific temperature, the temperature has to be above 140 degrees.
Okay. So the takeaway from this is go ahead and cook your big meal, divide it up, package it up, and get it into the freezer as soon as you can, so you have more, you'll have other meals to eat later down the road.
Yep.
Exactly. And the use of the microwave is there are defrost cycles on the most microwaves, and they will allow you to defrost something really quickly, or you can put it in the refrigerator and let it sit there overnight in the refrigerator, not on the
counter.
kitchen counter. But
And some things cook frozen in the oven.
some things
Okay,
cook
too.
frozen in the oven extremely well.
Right. What kind of recipes do you think your show, will it have a focus on recipes, or will you do a wide variety of cooking and demonstrating in the show?
I think we'd like to do all.
So say, yeah, all of the above.
All of the above. And I think there's a reason for doing all of the above. First off, those of us that are older, we were never old before. And so right now, it's time to learn some new techniques to make this new adventure that we're going through a lot easier. How to hold a knife so the arthritis doesn't particularly bother you, and so forth. And the proper way of chopping, or maybe using a device like a grater or a mandolin, that instead of having to chop with a knife, you just take it and it slices and dices. It makes julienne strips, and Julia Childs would love that. But and then it looks good, it tastes good, and it has a great nutritional value.
Yep.
And that's what this is all about.
It's very comprehensive. We think everyone will get something out of the show, even if you're not over 60.
Yeah. And
That whatever we're cooking, it can easily be eaten or prepared.
by any
There's no
age
law.
group,
Yeah, there
right.
will not be the age police will not show up.
You know, our objective from a recipe point of view is to have things simple, straightforward, so the average person can do this. And we're not trying to make gourmet food that would be served to an elegant king or queen.
Although they would probably love it.
They will.
I'm thinking when we all sit down at the table, we want to serve ourselves like we are that elegant person.
But you know, it's going to taste that way.
That's true.
But we haven't
That's
put
true.
caviar in it because we can't afford it.
As far as protein goes, I know fish is a protein, chicken is a protein, steak is a protein, pork is protein. But is one better versus the other nutritionally?
No, not necessarily. They're all proteins, but they also deliver different amounts of other nutrients.
Okay.
So the glory of food is that one food never provides one nutrient. A food provides multiple nutrients typically. So an example, this time of year, a lot of people are probably thinking about taking a vitamin C supplement. So they might go to GNC or Rite Aid or wherever it is they go, and they'll buy a bottle of vitamin C. That little pill will have vitamin C, nothing else. You eat an orange that has as much vitamin C as most people need in a day. You're also going to get potassium, folate, fluid, fiber, many other nutrients. When it comes to the different proteins, each of those proteins will provide, maybe steak provides more iron than fish, Pork provides more B vitamins. Fish provides more of those beneficial omega-3s than chicken. So you have all of them. You don't, try never to put foods into boxes that this one is better than that one. All food is good, and a variety of foods is one of the best things we can do for ourselves, because that's how we get a variety of nutrients. And that's what health is all about.
So is the rule about freezing the same as the rule about vegetables with the proteins? Can you bring it home from the store, divide it into smaller packages, and pop it right into the freezer? And
I don't see why not.
Yeah, it should work fine.
Okay.
Just make sure that you look at the dates that the supermarket has put on the foods, and you freeze before you're outdated.
Okay.
Yes, good point.
Okay.
Okay.
And inside most freezers or somewhere, there's also a list of those expiration dates. Like, just because it's in the freezer, it can't stay there forever.
Okay.
There's a certain amount of time you freeze chicken for, or fish or beef. There's expiration dates on the amount of time that you freeze
All right.
as well.
Well, I would like to thank you both very much for joining me today. I look forward to being part of Delicious and Nutritious. Our first show will be on December 1st at 2 o'clock. People, if they would like to be part of our live studio audience, will be able to join us at the Center for Active Living. I hope your show is a great success. I know it's headed in the right direction.
Excellent.
Thank you both very much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for today's show of Nook News, and we'll see you again.